What's the real history of Thanksgiving in America, and how does it relate to arguments over federalism, religious liberty, and the role of government? Pete Peterson is the dean of Pepperdine University School of Public Policy, and he recently wrote about this for the American Mind, and he joins us now. So, Pete, let's break down this true history of Thanksgiving.
Well, you're absolutely right to phrase this as a series of contentious battles along the lines of questions of federalism and religious liberty. The first proclamation issued by a president calling for a day of Thanksgiving was by none other than George Washington back in 1789. He did it on October 3rd, but he set November 26th as being the first day of national Thanksgiving. And this was, of course, in celebrating the passage of the Constitution. He called for it again 7 or 8 years later, but in that interim period, there were a number of debates in Congress about whether there should be a national day of anything. Certainly, this was along the lines of the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, with the Federalists calling for a national day of prayer and Thanksgiving, and the Anti-Federalists saying it's none of the federal government's business to be issuing these. And from that point, really going through the first part of the founding of our country, these debates usually centered around particular days or celebrations. One side, again, either the Federalists or later the Republicans, under Thomas Jefferson, there were debates as well. And it really wasn't until Abraham Lincoln in 1863, albeit 74 years later to the day from which George Washington had called for that original day of Thanksgiving, that it really became institutionalized in the midst of the Civil War, where President Lincoln was calling for a national day of Thanksgiving, prayer, and repentance. And it was that proclamation in 1863 which then became institutionalized as an annual day of Thanksgiving.
Pete, great to see you again. Great to have you here on the show. What do we make of this? I mean, the fact that this was contentious, do you have any thoughts on what that means for what Thanksgiving means or ought to mean now? I mean, it seems like something America wrangled with and then decided on. This is something we need to do. It's personally my favorite. I mean, it's just peculiar American holiday. It just, everything from the vibes, everyone knows what the feeling of Thanksgiving is, to everything else about it. But when you look at the history, how do you explain what it is now?
Well, I think it's, as you say, Matt, it's a genuinely American holiday, but it has been institutionalized in a genuinely American way, which is through debate and discussion, and really along the lines of these questions around federalism. What is the role of the federal government? What's the role of states? Certainly, again, in those early years, it was a debate and discussion of not whether the idea of a day of Thanksgiving was a good idea. I think even all of those who were debating on the anti-federalist side would have been perfectly fine with individual states deciding to issue Thanksgiving Day proclamations. But it really was on this question around whether it was the federal government's business to be issuing nationwide proclamations. And of course, it took the greatest war in the history of America, the Civil War, and President Lincoln, really, again, questions around federalism and the role of states and the federal government, to finally conclude this ongoing debate over decades about what the federal government's role was in issuing proclamations. And so I think we as Americans, in celebrating this day, should not only celebrate the fact of what this stands for, that we should be giving thanks and celebrating that uniquely American holiday, but to understand that we came to this conclusion of having a national day of Thanksgiving really through a series of really deep and searing, in some cases, debates about what the role of the federal government was versus the states.